Cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Nick Clegg is appointed as head of policy at Facebook. The New York Times attacks J.K. Rowling, and the Canadian government brings out the big guns on the protesters. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to the show. Now, there's going to be a lot on the way between now and 9 o'clock, but before we start, there is a quick news update from Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you. Good evening. Here's the main story from the GB newsroom. Messages of support are being posted after Buckingham Palace confirmed the Queen has tested positive for COVID. The palace say Her Majesty is experiencing mild cold-like symptoms, but expects to carry out light duties this week. The head of state, who's 95 years old, tested positive after coming in direct contact with her eldest son and heir, the Prince of Wales, the week he had the virus. Buckingham Palace says she'll continue to receive medical attention and follow all appropriate guidelines. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll have more on that story at the top of the next hour.
Tonight, I want to talk about a prominent former Liberal Democrat politician. Now, I should say from the outset, I don't have a problem with the Lib Dems, right? Some of my best friends are self-hating vegans. But now it seems that one of the heroes of the Liberal Democrat movement has sold his soul to big tech. On Wednesday, we learned that Nick Clegg had been appointed as the President of Global Affairs at Meta. That, by the way, is the new name for Facebook. And if you're under 30, you may not even have heard of Facebook either. It's basically like an old version of TikTok, but not so many dancing nurses and people with pink hair lecturing you about their pronouns. So why has Nick Clegg decided to pursue a career in Silicon Valley? What's going on? What could possibly have inspired him to shift the direction of his career from politics to social media in return for a mere £15 million a year? I guess he's just following his vocation. Well, Clegg will apparently be in charge of Facebook's policy decisions, and this will, of course, include WhatsApp and Instagram, also owned by Facebook. Should we be worried? The man was once the minion of David Cameron. He now arguably has more power than any elected official. He gets to decide the limits of acceptable speech on one of the world's biggest social media platforms. And this, remember, is the guy who wrote this book, How to Stop Brexit. I believe the working title was How to Stop Democracy, but the publishers thought it was a bit too on the nose. Now, the key thing with any new job is to be able to get on with one's employers. So with that in mind, it's worth looking at what Clegg had to say in a column for the Evening Standard back in 2016. He said, "I'm not especially bedazzled by Facebook. While I have good friends who work at the company, I actually find the messianic Californian new worldly touchy-feely culture of Facebook a little grating. Nor am I sure that companies such as Facebook really pay all the tax they could." That might make things a bit awkward at the office, but I imagine the £15 million a year will be some consolation. Of course, £15 million does seem a lot, doesn't it? And given that Clegg once said that bankers' bonuses were gratuitously offensive, I imagine he'll be giving most of that away to a cat home or something. I mean, he wouldn't want to open himself up to accusations of hypocrisy or anything like that. Big tech censorship is going to be one of the next big free speech battles, and that's largely because it's so misunderstood. We continually hear the argument that these are private companies and they can do what they like. But as I pointed out before on this show, this small group of multi-billion-dollar corporations now preside over the de facto public square of the digital age. They have a kind of collective oligopoly over the principal means of global discourse. And with that comes incredible power. And you can't vote them out because they're unelected. And rather than look into how this power can be curbed, our current government is looking to expand it. Now, you'll have heard all about the Online Safety Bill, which was formerly known as the Online Harms Bill, which ostensibly has some good aims. I mean, we're all disturbed how easy it is for children to access pornographic imagery online or by websites that encourage self-harm or even suicide. But the Online Safety Bill goes even further. I mean, it specifically addresses what the government calls legal but harmful speech. And what exactly does that mean? Well, it turns out that the government will be leaving the tech giants to decide what exactly constitutes harmful speech. And let's consider their record on that. Now, feminists are often thrown off social media platforms for stating biological facts, because biological facts are apparently harmful, particularly to those who don't know anything about biology. Twitter has occasional purges, which often include right-leaning political accounts or even satirical content, because the people who run Twitter aren't known for their sense of humour. Mind you, the body that they set up to dictate the limits of acceptable speech is quite genuinely called the Trust and Safety Council, which is such a chillingly Orwellian phrase that it would be quite funny if they weren't being deadly serious. We know that Silicon Valley has an ideological bias. The CEOs have admitted it. They talk about promoting healthy conversation and opposing hate speech, but as usual, when they talk about hate speech, they really mean speech they hate. And if you accept the idea that free speech does not include hate speech, whatever that is, and then you decide that anyone who disagrees with your political opinion is hateful, then you can justify censoring them under hate speech laws, and that's kind of how it works. Sometimes big tech do delete genuinely hateful comments, but more often than not, it's just statements they don't agree with, those that challenge their ideological preconceptions. And then they can say they're not censoring anyone, they're just preventing the spread of hate. It's a neat trick. And what about all that fake news we hear about? Well, personally, I don't trust the zealots of Silicon Valley to decide what is fake and what is real. I mean, these are the same people who claim that biological males have no advantage if they compete in women's sports. So their grip on reality isn't really all that secure. And remember when YouTube were deleting content and deactivating accounts because some scientists were suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the COVID pandemic started because the virus may have leaked from a lab in Wuhan? And this was dismissed as an insane conspiracy theory, unlike the theory that some farmer must have had sex with a bat or something. Now, it's generally accepted that the lab leak theory is actually likely to be true. And what can we learn from all this? Well, I suppose we could say that it's probably best that a group of kids at Silicon Valley don't get to decide what ideas should or should not be discussed. Fake news, like hate speech, it's just a phrase that people use to silence others if they happen to disapprove of what they say. Now, I don't have anything against Nick Clegg, not really, and I don't resent him getting a nice, cushy job. But I do worry when someone with his track record gets the kind of role that could make the fight for free speech even harder. Don't forget that Clegg pushed for increased state regulation of the media during the Leveson inquiry. He's no fan of free speech. But maybe, I'm being cynical. Maybe he'll do a fantastic job. Maybe Nick Clegg will convince our big tech overlords that they have to stop censoring opinions they don't like, that they have to reassert their former commitment to free speech and the marketplace of ideas. Maybe Nick Clegg can make us remember a time when the Liberal Democrats were actually liberal. Joining me for the next 2 hours on GB News Live, on TV and digital radio are Josh Howie and Jojo Sutherland, everyone.
Hello.
Josh, are you all right?
Yes.
Do you get nervous about big tech censorship, or do you think it's probably a good thing?
You know what? I'm such a centrist.
I knew it.
I'm sorry.
That's not why I invited you here to take a position one side or the other. There we go.
I'm disgusted by whichever position you want me to.
That's more like
go
it.
around being reasonable, Josh.
No, we can't have that. We want animosity. We want the sparks to fly. What do you think about it? Have you got any reservations about?
I have huge reservations about it. I spend every day trying to avoid Facebook, but then I do then go and look for people, and they're all banned. They're all in Facebook jail for something.
That's your friends.
Yeah, that's my friends who are apparently liberal.
Yes, it's a weird one, isn't
it? But that seems to have happening a lot now, that somebody's banned or going into Facebook jail or they've been, you know, so how's that happening?
And you know, it's so frustrating because I've been knocked off Twitter before and I'm quite an innocuous human being, right? But sometimes when that happens, I've done it for jokes, right?
Yeah.
And they'll knock you off and then you send them an email saying, why have I been thrown off? And they send you a sort of automated thing back, just sort of saying you've violated the terms of service, right?
Yeah.
And then I reply saying, well, what specifically? And they reply with another automated thing saying, you've just violated it. That's it.
Yeah, you can't argue with anybody. That's the problem because you're just talking to a bot.
Exactly. It's like you've committed a crime, but you don't know what the crime is, and they won't tell you the crime. It's very Kafkaesque. I mean, it is the trial, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't want to be alarmist or anything.
I know, it's amazing. I saw this.
Well, you should be.
I should be alarmist.
This feminist on Twitter, and she just kept on fighting. She wouldn't let it go, and it took about 1.5 years for her to get back on Twitter.
Did it work?
And it worked in the end, but she just didn't give up. It's like trying to get money back from EasyJet.
Yeah.
You just have to keep on going.
You have to, and they will eventually.
But it is slightly innocuous. A mutual friend of ours, she'd put on Twitter or something, she had a glass of wine, going, oh, wine is great, and lost her Twitter account for
saying wine
alcohol.
is great?
Wine is great, having a glass of wine, lovely.
What's she doing there? She's inciting fun.
She's inciting in alcoholism.
Yeah, okay, well, that might be what it is. Well, let's see what our audience did. We've got some audience members here tonight who have braved the storm and made it here, and they have some questions. They look quite an inquisitive bunch, don't they?
They do. I like the little orange, we've labelled them with orange bands.
Well, that's exactly what we do here. We label people. The first question is from Paul. Where is Paul? Hello, Paul.
Hi, Andrew. The question I've got is, do mums and dads no longer exist?
Do mums and dads no longer exist? Yeah. That's a big question. Well, actually, this is a specific reference to the 4 primary schools in Brighton where head teachers have replaced the words mum and dad with grown-ups, and one of the schools says it's to acknowledge the different family groupings that the pupils live in. And there's been another thing about how we shouldn't say miss or sir at schools because they're not gender-neutral terms. Do you have any thoughts about this, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I do have a particular...
You do have an opinion on this?
Well, first of all, mum and dad, those are like some of the first words you ever learned. Mummy, daddy. The idea, like schools...
That wasn't my first word.
What was yours?
Anthracite.
Of course it was, yeah. I'll go and look that up afterwards.
Okay.
But I think it's just absolutely disgusting. Schools are meant to teach words, not cut words out of vocabulary. And that's great. Go into school, learn. There are different family structures. There are different types of relationships, and different groups of people have children, and different family structures, and all of that. Teach that to children. Yeah. But don't then just cut out like the main norm of what most people are family.
Well, I wonder who is specifically offended about that. I mean, I know we're talking about Brighton, so they're just generally offended anyway. But what do you think who has complained about this? Because I don't believe, for instance, that trans families are going to complain about this. No, I don't think that gay families are going to complain about this.
As always, it's going to be the people who are looking out for those people, and those are the worst in society, the ones who are going to take offence where no offence has been taken.
Yes. Now, I've met your son. Did he used to call you mum, or did you insist on something more?
He calls me mother.
Mother.
He calls me mother. I think if they get rid of the word mum, I'd be delighted, because, do you know what I mean? If they just stop calling me mum, because it's usually followed by, mum, can I have some money?
Yes.
So if we just,
Is that just your children, though? I mean, we're talking about Scotland here, you know.
Yeah. Mum.
Yeah, of course. It is associated with whining.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It is. It's really funny, because when my kids were little, they used to go, mum, 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 and I tune out of it, and then they go, Jojo. I go, what? And so it is that thing.
It does have that effect, doesn't it?
Have that effect of when you use my actual name, then I might respond.
No, but get
rid of mum.
I'm trying to imagine what they were still saying. Jojo, I've got your wine ready.
100%.
We've got another question here from Ian. Where is Ian? Hello, Ian.
Evening, Andrew. So my question is, if J.K. Rowling didn't write the Harry Potter books, who did?
That's a big question. Now, some people might have missed this one. You did. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you'd have written the Harry Potter books, let's be honest. This is an odd one, because I think a lot of people miss this story because it wasn't generally reported on. But there was an advert by the New York Times in various sort of, posters on subways and this kind of thing in America. And part of this advert asked people to imagine Harry Potter without its creator. That was the actual quotation, imagining Harry Potter without its creation. And this is because of the New York... I mean, the New York Times, I feel, has sort of become very ideologically driven. It's like the American version of The Guardian, but even more severe. It's just kind of decided that it hates J.K. Rowling. You can see the image here, there, actually. And it's just... Well, firstly, it's this idea. Do you remember this feeds into a few weeks back where there was that group of filmmakers who said they were going to make their own version of Harry Potter, but only with sort of gender-neutral characters.
Yeah, according to their ideology.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, look, this is disgusting because I mean, how it could be a newspaper that's trying to do this to sell itself, but when you see any company, and they seem to sort of go for J.K. Rowling. By the way, I noticed they're not saying, like, let's get rid of a male creator. They're going for J.K. Rowling. And on top of that, like Body Shop last year, about 2 hours after J.K. Rowling did this famous letter that she put out on Twitter, talking about going through domestic violence. It was a really heartfelt, emotional letter, and asking for understanding and women's rights. And then the Body Shop, 2 hours later, put up this really snarky message, sort of saying, hey, check out this, J.K. Rowling, and why don't you read this book on trans rights? And you're just like, what? You know what? And that's a company that mostly sells to women. Like, that's just mental.
You see, I wouldn't mind in a way. I read the statement that J.K. Rowling put out on her blog. It's a big, long blog post. So compassionate, so clearly not transphobic. She reiterates the idea that trans rights are human rights. She says, of course they are, and she's talking about her concerns about single-sex spaces and about gender self-identification. It's a big, important debate. But what she's not doing is saying, I hate trans people. It's so. What I think is that this kind of reaction by the New York Times is so divorced from reality, and yet it seems to be quite an accepted.
Well, it's that thing of, it is shutting down debate. So, whether you agree or disagree with J.K. Rowling, surely the right to ask those questions and to have them up for debate. The idea that the New York Times is saying to somebody, imagine Harry Potter if it created by somebody else. Write another book.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
There's one that exists with Harry Potter. If you don't like it, don't read it. They had, imagine another wizard and make up your own.
Well, did you see the commemorative show that HBO did recently? And they just had a few clips of her. They basically erased her out of the thing, and then the new Fantastic Beasts film. Because the last Fantastic Beasts film the advert started with J.K. Rowling welcomes you too. And then they just silently took that out. It's like, no, it's not J.K. Rowling anymore. I mean, it's all her characters. She wrote it, she produced it, but basically she's got nothing to do with it.
So,
it's
if
insane.
you kind of take that back then, if people have such a problem with J.K. Rowling and her ideology and her thought process and her creative, then why do they still want to have Harry Potter and all the genius around that if she's such a toxic, negative, awful person? Surely.
Do you think they don't really believe it then?
I think maybe they don't.
Right, maybe not. I mean, who knows? I do think it's a kind of hysteria, and I think it is getting out of control.
It's a bandwagon as well, I think, because it's that, again, whatever the beginnings of this were, have been piled on, and then, people are repeating something. People are just like parrots that just then say, oh, and she said this, where did she say that? Oh, well, because someone told me. It's like... Please, can you double check? Please, can you look at the actual source of your information? And 9 times out of 10, people are not actually quoting from source of information. They're quoting from their emotional response or a conversation they've had with their mates.
I think that's a really good point, because I've often had these arguments on Twitter, which you shouldn't do, but they don't argue with people on Twitter.
Honestly.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But I have said to them again and again, can you just quote? Just show J.K. Rowling being transphobic, saying something just one would do, and they never can. And they either just take other people's out of context quotations, or they say, oh, well, this person said, or this article says this, and it's we have to be adults, right? If you're going to make an accusation as serious as transphobia or racism or homophobia, you better have some evidence, right?
And that's the thing. Sometimes I act dumb, which isn't difficult. And I will say to people, so what did she say? And they go, oh, well, she said this. Well, where did she say that? I haven't seen that. Where is that? Can you show?
Very frustrating.
Like you say.
Anyway, we've got another question now from Stephen. Where is Stephen? Hello, Stephen.
Hello, good evening. So should we be censoring films that were made more than 60 years ago?
Right, so it's an interesting question, one we could basically ask every week, because there's always a story, isn't there, of someone sort of cutting out various scenes. But this is specifically Channel 5 now. Channel 5 have removed all of the scenes that featured Mickey Rooney's character from Breakfast at Tiffany's, and Rooney's portrayal of the Japanese character has been condemned as racist. This film was released, of course, in 1961, and it might be that people had different views back then. I don't know. Am I wrong about that? I wasn't around.
No, I think when it came out, it was sort of instantly regretted. I know that the director, Mickey Rooney, said, oh, we wish we'd done it differently.
Yeah.
But that is the way it is. I mean, the fact that Channel 5 is doing it, and now, I don't know if Channel 5 is trying to go into the woke market to be like the wokest of the broadcasters.
Yeah. But what, at least
don't take it away from us.
But I think that's a very good point that you make, that that even at the time this was considered a bit dodgy. Yeah. And that makes it different, I think, than from some of the other stories. For instance, when they take out the scene from Fawlty Towers with the Major, where the mockery is, we're clearly mocking the Major for having these old regressive values, so taking that out doesn't really make sense. But in this case, you could argue, well, this was considered problematic at the time.
But But taking those scenes out make the film literally not make sense.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that there are scenes now within that. There's also a famous line that she doesn't get to say, which sort of points to the darker side from the original book. Which
Yes.
kind of, so it changes the whole sort of theme of it.
I mean, I think the best way with these sort of things is just leave the films as they are. You know, by all means, complain about them and say, I don't agree with the way this was done. But leave them as they are and let us all judge and decide for ourselves whether we watch it or not. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do.
Well, I think that, again, it's kind of trusting us to go, well, I don't want to watch it then. Do you know what I mean? And I think, like Josh says, I mean, it was very much, has always been seen to be one of those films going, oh, that character is, you know, pretty awful.
Put a warning up front. That's what they used to do.
Yeah.
Just keep a warning.
Well,
I just don't watch it. I've never seen it.
I watched it. I remember something about shoplifting. That's all it is.
Oh,
Yeah,
is it?
No, I don't know. I was a child when I watched it. That's the most.
Breakfast at what? Stealing jewels from Tiffany's.
Someone steals something in it.
Oh.
They have a sort of fun, and it incited me to shoplift, and that's how I ended up in prison. Anyway,
I got to 55
the next
without not knowing the plot.
You should watch it, I think. Next question is from Brian. Where's Brian?
Yeah.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Andrew. My question is, should primary school children be vegetarian?
Should primary school children be vegetarian? Everyone should be vegetarian, Brian.
You're a vegetarian, aren't you?
I actually am vegetarian, so I can get on my moral high horse here. This is a reference to Barrowford Primary School in Lancashire, which has banned meat from pupils' lunches. And the headmaster, Rachel Tomlinson, says it demonstrates how every person making a small change to their daily habits can have a much wider positive impact. Incidentally, the school was rated inadequate by Ofsted in 2015. I just thought I'd get that
threw
in.
that in.
Yeah, just a bit mean.
It is a bit mean.
Sorry,
That's a bit of a side swipe there.
I'm sorry to be mean, but don't send your kids to that school. So anyway, what do you think about that, Jojo? Do you think they should make that decision on behalf of kids?
Well, no, I don't think you can make any decision on behalf of children. Well, you can make, say, health and safety decisions on behalf of children, like not to let them walk out into moving traffic. But
I would say that's
what
good
they
advice.
put in their mouth, again, maybe not bleach. However, you know.
But there are parents who raise their children vegetarian or vegan or fruitarian.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sometimes.
And I think, but again,
it's not bad for you, is it?
It's not bad for you, and I don't think there's any harm to be done. But it's just that sense of having your decisions as a family or whatever taken over by people who don't even know you, really.
Yeah.
Go get out of my life.
Well, you know, I should say, by the way, just to be fair to the school, their rating was upgraded to good the year after by Ofsted, so I was just being a bit...
What, because they made all the kids vegetarian?
Well, maybe it's because of that. Look, I'm completely biased and partisan here because
they're all so tired now, all these kids, they're just passing out all day and no one's protesting.
Oh, that's such a lazy stereotype, Josh. You're better than that.
I am full of life and vigour.
Yes, but you take supplements, right?
I do take supplements.
So that's the point. These are young children. They are growing exponentially fast.
Yeah.
They need those supplements. They've sent out this letter a year after the fact. You don't send a letter the year later, say, by the way, for the last year, your kid's not been eating any meat. Some of these kids are going to be on free school meals. That might be the only substantial meal that they're going to have. They haven't said anything about like what supplements they're putting in. This is out of order.
Now, Josh, you're very passionate about this, I know, because you have thousands of children, don't you?
I have thousands of children.
You do.
Yes,
But you have to know, to be fair, Josh has 5 children. Is that right? 5 children.
I know
so
of,
surely
yeah.
they're not fully fed, are they? Because you can't afford to feed all of them. So they take it in turns, don't they?
They're all fully fed. I'm the one who's not fully fed.
You're the one who's not fully fed.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, look, we're going to have to go to a break. After the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be discussing the new guidance from the Department for Education that says teachers must not promote the Black Lives Matter movement in schools. See you shortly.
GBNews is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Teachers have been banned from promoting the Black Lives Matter movement to children. Guidance from the Department for Education that was published on Thursday says what it calls contentious and disputed historic periods must be taught in a balanced manner. It comes after teachers were accused of introducing politically biased materials to pupils during lessons about issues such as the police, racism and colonialism. To discuss this today, I am joined by Frances Gilbert, who is a teacher and author. Frances Gilbert, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Now, Frances, I wanted to ask you about this. Now, a lot of this came about because there was the revelation about Brighton Council, and Brighton Council had introduced an anti-racist schools strategy, and what they had effectively done is kind of found a way to bring critical race theory into schools, which even its originators wouldn't disagree is a political thing. Do you think this is a problem that is happening across schools, or do you think it's not a problem at all?
I wouldn't say it was a problem. I would say that obviously teachers, and I was a teacher for 25 years, and now I educate teachers at Goldsmiths, on the whole, are really neutral and try and present things in a kind of balanced way.
Yes.
I suppose I worry about this guidance because it has sort of resonance for me of in the 1980s when, you know, as a teacher we were told about Stop Clause 28 and banned from supposedly promoting homosexuality, and it has a sort of echoes of that. So it feels like the government sort of telling us things that we're essentially not doing. We're wagging the finger at us.
Well, let's explore that a little bit. So when it comes to Section 28, and it was very specific about this, saying that the promotion of homosexuality, and the phrase they used was a pretended family relationship, and they said that this couldn't be talked about in schools. And the current situation with critical race theory is slightly different, however, because the fear about this is that you have an ideology that is being promoted in schools as though it is uncontested fact. Not that they're saying, look, let's have a talk about what critical race theory is, why is it coming over from America, why are so many people attempting to implement it in schools. It's not that is the fear. The fear from the Department for Education is that teachers are almost acting like activists and saying, no, this is something that is true, that society is undergirded by these power structures that we tell you about, that white privilege is a thing, that all white people are essentially oppressors or complicit in an oppressive system, whether they like it or not. So do you think there must be a distinction there between talking about something and simply asserting it as though it is truth? Do you accept that distinction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's obviously arisen because of the murder of George Floyd, which created a kind of huge speculation over all these issues. And I know I taught for some years at a school called Sir John Cass Secondary School, and that school has now been renamed because we found out around about the time of the murder of George Floyd, and I taught there for many years and didn't know this, that he was a very prominent member in the Royal Africa Company in the late 17th, 18th century, and was involved in setting up the slave trade. And so that school was changed. That name was changed to All Saints, Stepney School, as it is now, because clearly the school and the parents, the governors, and everyone came together of all political persuasions, because I know the Sir John Cass Company is, left and right are involved in that company, because clearly you can't have a school in the current context named after a slave trader,
But can you not? I mean, what would be more valuable in that situation? Is it to erase the name, pretend he was never associated with the school, or to talk about why the school is named that way, to engage with the reality, and often an unpleasant reality, Isn't that the more sort of educationally interesting approach?
Well, it's problematic, isn't it? Because he was very heavily involved with the setting up and the structure of the slave trade, and clearly, you know, the money for that school sort of initially came from the profits of the slave trade. And I think the school felt that they're not going to ignore the history, and there was a big conversation about this at the time, and they will teach about how the school was previously funded and named after this man. But so I don't think the history is ignored, rather I think it's actually discussed in more openness, because I didn't know anything about that when I was teaching there in the 1990s.
Yeah.
No, it was never mentioned. You know, he was celebrated as a sort of great figure that funded the school, whereas obviously he was a problematic figure, wasn't he? Because he did fund the school, but he made his money out of a terrible...
That's an interesting point, isn't it? That in a sense, where there have been failures of education, you know, it's exactly as you described. Why weren't you told about this person?
Yeah.
Why weren't you told about the history? And it seems to me that does seem like a bit of a failure. But on the other hand, I feel that there are educational opportunities within acknowledge. I mean, just to sort of test this hypothesis a bit. How far would you go with this? So we all agree, everyone agrees that the slave trade was an evil. And no, you're not going to find someone who's supportive of slavery in this country. But then you have a number of schools have changed the house names of, say, J.K. Rowling House. And they've changed that name because they say that she is too toxic now. Well, that's not a settled matter, is it? You know, the matter of slavery was settled in the 19th century. J.K. Rowling, she's not a toxic figure for most people. Do you accept that there's a level of subjectivity to this that might cause problems with other sort of figures?
Yeah, I mean, and it is about, you know, like in the case of Cass at that time, now called All Saints Secondary School, it was a big conversation with the governors and the parents and the then student body over it. So I think things like this have to be thought through really carefully, don't they?
So there has to be a conversation.
There has to be a democratic conversation, but ultimately, I guess, you know, that foundation renamed themselves because it was a big foundation. The Cass Foundation was a big foundation, and they had a number of schools and an art school and another primary school, all of which have been renamed, and they've taken down the statue of Sir John Cass in London now.
How do you feel on principle about that, though? I mean, and what if it were a more sort of a more contentious figure? If you take someone like Winston Churchill, right? So Winston Churchill is considered by many to be one of the greatest Britons of all time. Sort of defeated fascism. You'd give him a bit of a pass for that, maybe. But he was also certainly his cabinet was implicated in the Bengal famine, and people and some of the comments that he made about other races would say that he is a difficult figure. Similarly with Mahatma Gandhi, who made some comments about African figures, but at the same time got the British out of India, right? So there are pros and cons, right? Where would you stand on issues like that, where it's very difficult and very contentious? Would you feel comfortable with just destroying statues, taking away the names?
Absolutely not. I mean, you know, it has to be a nuanced conversation, doesn't it? And, you know, those figures are obviously very different from someone whose main wealth came from the slave trade. And so, you know, I think that, and I would say, like, teachers, I would like to reassure the viewers here that teachers are very neutral, politically neutral figures, and they make every effort to encourage the students to have different points of view. And that's one thing I do certainly agree with in the guidance that's coming out from the government, that you need a balanced view, don't we? But I worry that if you know, does this mean that we're not allowed to talk about the murder of George Floyd, because that essentially did lead to a huge sort of growth in the Black Lives Matter movement, didn't it? It was an important...
That's not what they're saying. They're not saying you can't talk about George Floyd. They're not even saying you can't talk about Black Lives Matter.
But I worry that the teachers might be worried that you can't bring it up because, you know, it does feel a bit like Clause 28 again, doesn't it? That you literally felt, I was teaching in the late 1980s there, you literally felt you couldn't mention homosexuality in schools without fear of, you know, effectively being arrested or sacked.
Yeah, but the legislation with Section 28 was specifically anti-gay insofar as it said things like you could mention it as long as it was linked with the spread of AIDS. So, I mean, that's quite clear in where it's coming from. Whereas I think this sort of legislation, which is particularly targeted at things like critical race theory, is sort of saying, look, talk about it, but don't talk about it as though it's... Because this is an ideological perspective. You know, I mean, would you accept that? It's not something that is settled. It's not something that we believe that all white kids are...
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Black Lives Matter movement from my knowledge of it, is quite wide, isn't it? It's a massive, political figures on the left and right have been supportive of it.
Yes.
So it's a huge thing that initially comes from the United States. It's not anything really initially.
But that's the point. It doesn't really map very well onto our circumstances. Now, for instance, one of the Black Lives Matter, one of the principles on the website initially, which they've since taken down, is that we should dismantle the cisgendered nuclear family. Would you be comfortable with the teacher saying to the kids, "This is what we need to do"?
Absolutely not.
Right.
No,
so I think that's what the legislation is attempting to address. Is that kind of?
Yeah. Obviously, that's very doctrinaire sort of. Is inappropriate, and I have never, ever in my experience, ever come across a teacher talk like that to any class. They wouldn't.
Well, you say that, but what do you make of the National Education Union? It's the biggest teachers' union, saying that there is an urgent need to decolonise every level of the school system, even down to the arrangement of the desks. And they talk about how what we need is more activists in the classroom. Now, that's coming from the biggest teaching union. So you don't agree with them?
That sounds, really ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, an impossible job. Although I would say, we are supportive at Goldsmiths. We have had a movement for decolonising the curriculum and thinking about, the areas of history that have not been covered previously. So we do look at, issues around British colonialism which haven't been discussed. And that is a significant conversation, because many of the children that I've taught in London come from are of colour and come from those backgrounds and often don't even know what colonialism is.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think that what you're identifying there is, I think it might be about different definitions. Some people feel that decolonising the curricula is all about exactly what you described, just simply maybe bringing in voices that haven't been heard before, expanding reading lists, that kind of thing. For other people, decolonising the curriculum is stripping it of dead white males, and I think the problem is that when people aren't clear about that, you get these conflicts,
Yeah, that certainly isn't the case, So we at Goldsmiths have a really big thing around the teaching of Shakespeare, and you think of a play like The Tempest, which is a sort of parable about colonialism, and it's a great play, isn't it? And so we teach that and teach, some been amazing recent productions of it that have looked at the way in which Prospero, the lead character in that play, is sort of a coloniser of that island, and he imprisons Caliban and Ariel, and we look at that and we can teach that interpretation to children, but also teach other interpretations, that he's a great magician and a great figure in many ways. So those sort of debates can be had in a class.
Although didn't Caliban and his mother imprison Ariel before Prospero got there? Let's not get into that. Anyway, the point is, I think it is an interesting thing to discuss. And just quickly before you go, because I'm fascinated by all of this, but I just want to know your thought, because I was a teacher myself, right?
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of teachers. And to be honest, there was a temptation sometimes sort of push your political views I never did it, by the way, because I always did that thing of trying to challenge them, and I sometimes said things I didn't think to try and get that. But I did know teachers who were very much pushing either a left wing or a right wing. Do you accept that there's a temptation, that you've got a captive audience, malleable minds? You could proselytise, right?
Obviously, there's a temptation to give your views, but that isn't my experience of seeing teachers or myself. You try and give a different set of opinions and a balanced view to children, because that's what education is.
Couldn't agree more. I think we're talking about good teachers there. There are a few bad ones. Anyway, I won't go into that because I'll just be settling scores. Francis, thanks very much for joining me today. Thank you. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be discussing the Canadian government's response to the truckers' protest against COVID-19 restrictions and vaccine mandates. See you in a couple of minutes.
On Mark Dolan tonight, with Canada arresting protesters in the capital, is the very principle of freedom in the West under threat? We'll speak to the leader of Reform UK, Lawrence Fox, and former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. What are the true origins of COVID? We'll catch up with Matt Ridley, who's written a best-selling book exposing the origins of the virus. My all-star panel include the Sun columnist Tony Parsons. And in my Big Opinion monologue, Boris Johnson is right to scrap all COVID restrictions. See you at 9.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Nation. Later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my beautiful panel to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So look, if you've got any problems, and I'm sure you have, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We're going to do our best to remedy your life. Believe me, we can do it. Now, Canadian police have been using pepper spray and stun grenades in an attempt to end the trucker protests that have been going on for more than 3 weeks now. The Freedom Convoy movement began as a demonstration against COVID-19 restrictions and vaccine mandates. Earlier this week, the Canadian government invoked emergency powers and cut off the protesters' funding. I'm joined now by Fraser Myers, who's the deputy editor of Spike. Fraser, everyone.
Hello.
I know you've spoken a lot about this and you have some strong feelings about it. For a start, do you think the Canadian government are going a little bit too far?
I think that's a bit of an understatement, yes. This is a really extraordinary authoritarian move. Now, we've seen a lot of authoritarianism in the past few years, but we have to remind ourselves that this is a peaceful protest we're talking about.
Right.
It's disruptive, yes, absolutely. Many protests are. And the police had actually been dealing with some of the worst disruption before Trudeau invoked these emergency powers. So there were truckers blocking the Ambassador Bridge between Canada and America, really important, kind of trade route. The police had actually cleared that the day before Trudeau invoked his emergency powers. And these are kind of wartime powers, essentially.
Yes.
Similar powers have only ever been used in terrorist hostage situations.
Do you want to explain to people what precisely they've done in terms of invoking these powers and why?
Yeah, so essentially, Trudeau invoked something called the Emergency Act.
Right.
It's not been used in its current form before, but his father, when he was Prime Minister, used a similar law to deal with a hostage situation of Canadian separatist terrorists in Quebec.
Right.
And what this law has allowed Trudeau to do is essentially to fine protesters or to arrest them on site, to freeze people's bank accounts, or to allow banks to freeze people's accounts without any court orders or state interference. And it's even relatives of protesters are having their funds cut off and things like that. So it's a really extreme escalation, way beyond normal policing of protests.
Now, the government would say, to counter that, well, they would say, but we're dealing with fascists here. We're dealing with the far right, with transphobes and homophobes and Islamophobes. I believe those are some of the phobes that Justin Trudeau threw at the truckers. Is he right?
No, he isn't, and he exposed those insults for what they often are now. Those are now just sort of signifiers that this person is someone I don't agree with.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing. The protests have nothing to do with trans issues or race issues, but it is telling that those have been invoked by Trudeau. Those have been invoked by the media who support Trudeau. So there's been the general impression that these people are somehow backward, reactionary, and have a whole set of other views that are unressed to the
I think
to the
they found
protests.
some examples of protests.
Yeah, there have been.
Those.
There absolutely have been. There have been a small number of essentially flags with swastikas and some Confederate flags. A tiny number, but this has been blown out of all proportion. The vast majority of people are waving the Canadian flag.
So this is actually a real problem for I think all sides of the political spectrum, because whenever you have a mass protest, there's always going to be some bad apples who hook onto it in an effort to hijack it. And by focusing on them and sort of smearing the entire peaceful protest as though that's all it is, doesn't that have ramifications for any future protests for whatever we want to protest?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, a protest about mandatory vaccinations is going to attract some anti-vaxxers. That's a given. But to say blithely that they are therefore, or everyone else who participates in the protest is a racist, is a misogynist, far-right, anti-black, whatever the case may be, essentially demonises anyone who protests against the government, anyone who is not one of us, essentially. And it's really important to understand that those kinds of insults, that dismissal of those people, has laid the groundwork to legitimise this crackdown.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what's made it possible. That's what's made it acceptable in the eyes of, unfortunately, some Canadians and in the eyes of much of the West as well.
I think, a lot of people in Canada are sort of saying, yeah, but you're not there and you don't understand how inconvenient this is and how much noise they're making, how disruptive this is. Now, we've seen over here, a lot of people, of course, will have seen the Insulate Britain protest or Extinction Rebellion protest, and they will say, look, people were prevented from getting to hospital when they needed treatment. Isn't the same thing happening in Canada? And if it is, shouldn't the government intervene?
Well, there has to be a kind of proportionate response. The right to protest is not as absolute in the same way that freedom of speech is. You can't have carte blanche to disrupt things. You can't have carte blanche to vandalise property or things like that. And, once in the past, people understood that sometimes it was worth getting arrested for those things. Civil disobedience. It was understood there was a kind of a contract that you'd be prepared to be arrested for those things because you understood the importance of breaking unjust laws.
Yes.
So anyone who says there should be an absolute free-for-all on protests is wrong, which I think is kind of what some of the arguments around Extinction Rebellion were saying. But in Canada, we have to recognise that this has gone a lot further than normal policing, than on police moving on disruptive vehicles and things like that. And it's gone into something much darker and much more authoritarian, where people are essentially, having their livelihoods threatened and curtailed because of their opinions.
And why is it that this is? I mean, I have to say, like when I see the footage online, and I have people saying to me, "Oh, they're causing all this violence, all these truckers," and the most I've seen is people on a few bouncy castles or something like that. Can't find the footage of the violence. Am I just not going to the right sources?
No, I think we can all recall in 2020 during the kind of Black Lives Matter summer, where there were obviously a mixture of peaceful protests and some riots, and you'd have the reporter from CNN standing in front of the flaming building saying, these are, fiery but mostly peaceful protests. In Canada,
that was a work of genius, by the way.
It was brilliant. In Canada, you have the exact opposite of that, where you have reporters being sent out to report on bouncy castles and, soup kitchens and hot tubs as well. There's been, lots of people sitting in a hot tub. And then the commentary over the top of it of saying that this is insurrection by air horn, Canada is under siege, this is a violent fascist coup taking place in front of our eyes.
So what does this do to our trust in the media? And both of those examples are good. I mean, I support peaceful protest no matter if I agree with the movement or not. But once it crosses the line into criminality, I do have a problem with it. Now, when the Black Lives Matter protest, the protest that did turn violent, I think it's a no-brainer. You just say, well, we condemn that, whether we agree with it or not, we condemn it. But that didn't happen. The media sort of tried to twist it and say, oh, well, even when they're burning buildings down, but they're burning them down in a peaceful way. And then similarly with this, now they're saying these people are basically the second coming of Adolf Hitler, and they're just sitting around sharing soup.
Yeah, I think that everyone now is going to have, if they haven't already, sort of noticed this or started thinking this, that they're not going to get the unvarnished facts. The media is always going to give their spin on it. Now, that's always been the case to a certain extent, and a lot of people would criticise Fox News in America for being particularly egregious on the right, and perhaps CNN and NBC being the opposite on the liberal side. But increasingly, we're seeing that kind of spin being put on from newscasters that are supposed to be independent of politics. So it's been egregious to see in Canada, the CBC, their equivalent of the BBC, has put out articles saying that the word freedom is now a far-right trope.
Yes, I've seen that one.
Which is crazy. Our own BBC, which is again supposed to be politically neutral, somehow I'm reading their report on the truckers, and it says a woman told how she was afraid about her trans child, suddenly inserting again this trans issue into
which has nothing to do with it.
Which has nothing to do with it. So I don't even know if these journalists notice that they're doing it. Frankly,
really,
I think it's almost second nature to them to see a blue-collar worker or someone who doesn't look like them and think, well, they're probably reactionary, probably far-right, probably racist,
We had the same in France, didn't we, with the Gilets jaunes?
Exactly. It was exactly the same thing with the Gilets jaunes. They're arguing over a fuel tax. It then becomes that becomes the spur for a much bigger movement around democracy, around inequality, against inequality. And the immediate response is to say, oh, they must be racist, or they're funded by Putin is another,
that's a common one. Yeah.
In Canada, interestingly, people seem to be saying it's funded by Trump, or Trump supporters in the US is the attack line.
There's a weird
obsession
obsession
moved on slightly.
There's an obsession with who's funding this.
Yeah.
I've been accused of being funded by Putin a fair few times. I think everyone has.
You're a dangerous man out to destabilise the West.
Very dangerous.
Yeah.
What does this do to Justin Trudeau now? I mean, because there are some people who are sort of saying, look, he can't really come back from this, can he? Or can he? Because I think a lot of Canadians are actually sick of the truckers.
Yeah, it's hard to say, really. I think a lot of people recognise it as an overreach. A lot of people don't support the disruption, but there's a lot of polling evidence to suggest that now a majority of Canadians want to get rid of, most of the COVID restrictions, which is a change, a positive change, probably resulting from these protests, from having this debate. As for Trudeau, I mean, we shouldn't overstate his popularity anyway. He lost the popular vote in the last 2 Canadian elections.
Yes.
So he's in charge of a minority administration. So maybe a lot of Canadians didn't like him that much anyway. Whether that's enough, whether that means anyone will coalesce around an alternative, is always the question you have to ask in these situations.
Well, fascinating stuff. Fraser Myers, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And now to the part of the show that we call Devil's Advocate, and this is where our panellists attempt to juggle a few hot potatoes of the day. Now, this week, our big question is about marriage. I'm sure a lot of you are married, if you're unfortunate to be so, and we're going to be talking about it now. Is marriage a good thing? And first up, arguing in favour of marriage, is Josh Howie.
Well, firstly, I would like to thank Jojo for swapping with me when I discovered that my wife was going to be watching this. Very, very grateful. I'm a traditionalist. I'm married. I'm happily married. I remember proposing, and I did it. Got down on my knee, got the ring out. I looked up at her, and I said, "They say keep your friends close." But your enemy's closer, will you marry me? And it's good, but yes, it can be tough. My wife thinks I'm a bit of a control freak. I read in her diary, and but the point is, and also, I know the pre-watershed, but sexually, I'm sick of my wife treating me like I'm some sort of piece of meat, and she's a vegetarian, so that was why I was so angry earlier. But I think you stick at it. That's what I've learned, because my parents got divorced, and I know how traumatic that can be to children. I'm still suffering from that trauma. The studio is very close to my old where I grew up, and they divorced and they sold that house, and I drive past there every day and I see how much it's worth now, and it just would have sorted me out, that inheritance. So that's very upsetting. And my dad, I don't want to cheat, my dad was a bit of a player, used to like his women like he liked his tea, brought to him by another woman. And I don't agree with that. I am very much straight. I'm trying to be the opposite of him. So I like my women like I like my tea, sipping the same one, and trying to make it last the rest of my life, as it gets colder. Actually, I'll take Joe's position.
Well, look, I think you've had your time, Josh Howie, everyone. We are very persuasive, Josh. Thank you. Very persuasive. Now, arguing against marriage, it's Jojo Sutherland.
You go with what you know, because I'm the youngest of 7. My parents weren't Catholics; they were alcoholics. But they'd been married before. So my mum was married once before. My dad was married twice before it. My dad had a daughter from his first marriage and 2 sons from his second, and my mum had a daughter and a son from her first marriage. Then she married my dad, had me and my brother, so my half-sister, my 2 half-brothers on my dad's side, a step-brother and sister to my half-brother, my half-sister on my mother's side, which makes me really kind of not very good at marriage. So I got married first time around and then got divorced because, well, and then got married again because I've got 4 kids and they can't all have the same father. That's it's technically proven that, you know, after 3 you jump jockey, Josh, so I check about number 5. But I am actually now married to my ex-husband's brother, which, it's about the same reaction as I got from my ex-husband. It's complicated because, just to explain, my older 3 kids are with my ex-husband, now brother-in-law, and one with my ex-brother-in-law and now husband, so Christmas is fun. And obviously the older 3 were a bit freaked out at their mum having a baby with their uncle, but they're fine now. Kids are resilient. So yes, so I'm Auntie Mummy. It all works quite well.
Jojo, I'm going to have to put a stop because that's the time, and also I'm confused as hell about your family. But Jojo's other than there. I don't know what to think, but luckily I don't have to because we've got to go to a break. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, I'm going to be bringing you a clip from my new podcast where this week I've been talking to the philosopher and writer Nina Power about her book, What Do Men Want? If you want to know the answer to that question, come and join me in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So in my upcoming podcast episode, which will be released at 9 p.m. tonight, I'm joined by Nina Power to discuss her new book, which is called What Do Men Want? Nina argues in the book that many men, especially young men, feel lost and alienated. And she says that masculinity might be in crisis. Not necessarily. Let's hear what she's got to say about it. Welcome to the Free Speech Nation podcast with me, Andrew Doyle, for GB News. Today, my guest is Nina Power. Nina is a writer and philosopher who teaches at the Mary Ward Centre. And during our conversation, we spoke a lot about feminism, about the men's rights movement, about traditional roles of masculinity and femininity, and whether we have anything to learn from history in terms of the roles of men and women in society. Nina has just written a new book, which is called What Do Men Want? Masculinity and Its Discontents. And that is available to buy now. And of course, we discussed that book and her central thesis there. So this is the Free Speech Nation podcast with me, Andrew Doyle, and Nina Power. Nina, your new book is called What Do Men Want? It's quite an intriguing question. I'm very much looking forward to reading it. And the subtitle of the book is Masculinity and Its Discontents. Is it the case, as a lot of people think, that masculinity is in crisis?
Well, this is a perennial phrase. Masculinity was in crisis 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's in crisis today. So it's one of those ways of putting it. Obviously, the title of the book is a double joke at the expense of Freud, who infamously asked, "What does woman want?" And I thought I would turn it around, and instead of civilizations and its discontents, it's masculinity and its discontents. But I would say that if that there is always a kind of crisis, but nevertheless, it always takes on a particular character. So in the last sort of 5 years or so, I'm sure you're aware, we've seen lots of discussion that has been largely negative, directed towards men in terms of kind of generalizations about toxicity and male privilege, and after Me Too in particular, a kind of almost like open season on men and their supposed iniquities and bad behaviour. And there's obviously a kind of problem with that in the sense that most men don't behave in those ways in the first place. It's not true to our experience of men, I think. Even if we've had a bad experience with one man or something, it doesn't mean that all men are kind of doomed by association.
So when you say that masculinity has always been perceived as being in crisis, I think that rings true. I can't remember a time when someone somewhere wasn't saying that there is a crisis of masculinity. But do you feel that sometimes feminist movements are at risk of essentializing what it means to be a man?
Yeah, so I think there's something that calls itself feminism today, which perhaps isn't actually feminist, at least not in the way that I understood it from the second wave and the way that it kind of filtered down into the 90s, which was actually much more generous, I think, to both boys and girls and men and women, because it was about breaking down gender stereotypes and actually, encouraging both girls and boys to express themselves however they wanted. So I think, but I think since then, or in the last sort of short while, we've had this kind of, these sort of generalizations, essentialist claims about men, which were always like the negative stereotype of second wave feminists, but wasn't actually true. You know, the idea that all feminists hated men, which isn't true of the second wave, but now is sort of perversely true of a kind of mainstream liberal feminism, which often suggests that it hates men and makes kind of generalizing claims about how awful they are. Sometimes it's a joke, sometimes it's more lighthearted, but not always. And I think that it has a kind of grinding effect on the kind of general discourse, and the way, hopefully it doesn't affect too much how, we behave to each other in our private lives or normally. But I think it's almost like this unnecessary encouragement of resentment between the sexes, I think.
I suppose a lot of feminists would say that, irrespective of which wave of feminism we're talking about, this is a common accusation, that this is just women fighting for their rights is just misandry sort of dressed up. But do you think it is specifically more true of what we would call fourth wave feminism or than second wave?
Yes, I think there's a strange permission, which is very, very thoughtless actually, and it goes along with a kind of general sort of coarsening of public discourse, and I think also a kind of consumerism and individualism. The idea that if someone lets you down, then you can kind of hate, everyone who falls under that banner, and there's a kind of general sort of maybe left liberal discourse which has been very, very down on men and kind of permitted generalizations from like one bad instance, for example.
Yes. Well, do you think you could clear up for us? Because I think there's a lot of confusion around what feminism means now, and you're even seeing a lot of infighting between various feminist factions. So, we have first wave feminism, sort of the suffragette movement, early 20th century, then the second wave sort of liberation movements of the 60s and 70s, then third wave feminism, which is sort of when intersectionality started to creep up in the 90s, and then what we call now fourth wave feminism. The only way I can really think to describe fourth wave feminism is intersectionality gone a bit mad. I mean, is that a bit unfair?
No, I mean, I think there are lots of very strange things going on at the moment. I mean, feminism seems to be one of the only contemporary movements which isn't allowed to have as its object its original focus. So, you're not allowed to talk about women in particular ways, or if you do, you have to kind of include anyone else who's marginalised, which is very, very strange because no other identity-based movement does that, if you see what I mean. So feminism has become quite sort of... feminism is for everybody, apparently, and it should be all-inclusive.
Well, that's a distinction, isn't it? Because a lot of second-wave feminists would say, for instance, that men cannot be feminists, that it is very much about the category of being female. And then often you see, particularly on social media now, the phrase, if your feminism isn't intersectional, it isn't feminism. There's quite a dogmatic sense of what feminism means. What does feminism mean to you? And do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes, I do. I mean, very much in the second wave. I mean, I was, grew up in the countryside in the 90s and 80s and 90s, and I was definitely a beneficiary of a certain kind of trickle-down second wave feminism, which was much more about kind of freedom and, not closing down possibilities on the basis of one's sex. It was saying that basically, it doesn't matter if you're a girl, you can be interested in these things or whatever things that you like. But it doesn't change your sex. You're still a girl who maybe likes things that are historically associated with boys. But that's a good thing. And the same would go for boys, but why not sort of open up the boundaries of possibility rather than kind of close them down? And I think we've had a kind of regressive moment, like something presents itself as progressive, but it's actually reactionary and regressive. So it's all extremely confusing, like the idea that if, we need to bring back stereotypes, and if you like certain things or behave in certain ways, then that means that you are the historical version of that stereotype. I mean, this was not the direction we were heading in the 90s.
That was a clip from my conversation with Nina Power, and you can hear the full interview on my podcast, which is called Free Speech Nation, the podcast, and that goes live right at the end of this show. That's 9 p.m. It's coming up to 8:05. You're watching Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is Free Speech Nation on GB News TV and digital radio. My panellists this evening are the brilliant Josh Howie and Jojo Sutherland. Now, there's lots on the way between now and 9 o'clock, but first, here is a quick news update with Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening. Here is the main headline in the GB newsroom. The Queen has tested positive for COVID-19, but Buckingham Palace says she's suffering just mild cold-like symptoms. The 95-year-old head of state is being cared for and monitored by her royal physicians. She expects to carry out light duties this week. Earlier today, she sent a message of congratulations to the Team GB women's curling team after they won the nation's only gold medal at the Beijing Winter Olympics. Her Majesty's diagnosis follows a string of COVID cases among the royal family, including her son, the Prince of Wales, and daughter-in-law, the Duchess of Cornwall. TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. We'll have more on that story and others at the top of the next hour.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle, and my beautiful panel, Josh Howie and Jojo Sutherland. Now, I was talking before the break, I was talking to Fraser Myers about the truckers in Canada and the various response there. Jojo, I know you have some strong feelings about this. I was just wondering what you thought.
I do have strong feelings because I think the fact that they're 90% vaccinated, the truckers, but yet it's being pushed that they're an anti-vax movement and anti-mask, and you're kind of going, well, that doesn't actually make sense. And the very fact that, people protesting, to end mandates and to end all these restrictions.
Yes.
And that people see that as somehow an awful thing.
Well, this was the point we were making about how when you get sort of the fringe group attaching itself to a bigger protest, then people focus on that. But as you say, 90% of those truckers were voluntarily vaccinated.
Voluntarily vaccinated.
If they were anti-vax, they're doing it really badly.
Really badly. It's a really strange way to go around having a political protest.
It really is.
But I think, again, it's, coming back to what everybody keeps saying, that it's the principle of the idea that you then convince people that protests are a bad idea, you get the public on side, and then we ban protest, and that's the thin edge of the wedge before people go, oh no, but actually I want to protest. Well, too late now. You didn't agree with that protest, but now you can't protest.
I mean,
Josh, what do you think?
I just thought it was one of the most interesting things about what we were talking about was how traditional media has sort of used those different examples and pushed their own agenda onto it.
Yeah.
And it just made me think that maybe someone should start up some kind of like news channel where you had like a lot of different voices.
Wouldn't that be good?
I don't know. That was what I was thinking. Call me crazy.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
It would probably be maligned in some way if they did it, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah, get lots of criticism.
I think it's worth the flack. Anyway, so I just want to come to my audience now for a few questions. The first question here is from Sean. Where is Sean? Hello.
Hi, Sean.
Good evening. Is James a girl's name?
Well, Sean, if you don't know, is James a girl's name? Well, it's very cryptic. But this would be a reference to James Barry, who's a famous 19th century doctor. Now, there's been an interesting tweet this week from the Edinburgh Medical School, so at Edinburgh University, talking about James Barry. Barry was born Margaret Ann Buckley, but then Barry sort of was discovered to be a woman after death. But this is not what the Edinburgh Medical School said. The Edinburgh Medical School said that Barry, here's the tweet, was actually assigned female at birth, effectively implying that they was trans.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that, of course, is that's not true. James Barry was, as a matter of historical and biological fact, a woman. So there's a weird thing here that the medical school is sort of trying to... Isn't this an odd one?
It's more than odd. What's funny or hypocritical about it is that their misogyny of the time meant that they weren't allowing women into medical school, which is why she had to pretend to be a man to get in there. So they're not addressing that and going, oh, by the way, back in the day we were out of order. Yeah. They're trying to say, oh, no, it's wonderful, she was trans and whatever. And I think
they was trans.
They was trans, yeah. And I think the thing is they used that, one of the photos I think they even got wrong, and it was Joseph Barry, and you think, oh, that person does kind of look like a bloke. And then it was like, oh no, that was a bloke.
I think that was a dad or something, wasn't it?
Someone like that. He had some wonderful sideburns that I don't think.
Like one of the photos wasn't even her.
Wasn't her.
I mean, they're really not great on the accuracy at the Edinburgh Medical School. Don't get an operation from anyone who went there. They'll take your spleen out when it's meant to be your pancreas.
Absolutely. And assigned at birth is a very controversial term that has been not used in a lot of places.
This is a weird one, right? Assigned at birth. Now, I saw the phrase assigned sex at birth on an official NHS document, and I'm thinking, if I work for the NHS, I would know that sex is observed and recorded, not assigned. It's not that the midwife flips a coin.
Yeah, what will we give you today?
Yeah.
Hello.
I mean, that's surely...
I'm a donkey.
Isn't that a phrase we should just dispel with now?
I think so. And, I mean, I agree with you, Josh. The idea that, you know, James Barry was transgender was a falsehood, and it was, in fact, because, you know, women...
Because of misogyny.
Misogyny, and women couldn't get jobs because they had to pretend to be men.
Like Milan is also transgender. She was also transgender as well, fighting in the Chinese war.
Right. Oh, really?
You don't have enough kids. You don't have enough kids to watch Milan, but anybody who's watched the animation will.
I tell you what, it's interesting that Edinburgh University themselves, on another website associated with the university, they proudly proclaim that James Barry was their first female student.
And also, Edinburgh Medical University isn't the most trusted anyway, historically. Were they not selling bodies to Birkenhead?
Yes, they were.
I think they've got a bit of a rep.
They absolutely were.
Let it go.
Yeah,
God,
that was a while ago, to be fair.
Oh, of course, sorry, we forgot history doesn't exist.
Anyway, the next question is from Jessica. Where's Jessica? Hi, Jessica.
Good evening, everyone. My question is, can two pieces of art be in dialogue with each other?
Can two pieces of art be in dialogue with each other? So this is a reference to the Tate Britain's decision to commission a new artwork that will be on display alongside a mural that contains racial imagery. This is the Tate who said that the artwork will be in dialogue with this. So this is a big mural by Rex Whistler back from 1927, and the Tate Ethics Committee concluded that the mural was unequivocally offensive. Now, it's an interesting one. I believe the mural is now in the restaurant area, and so they're going to put another work of art to sort of counter the evil of this other work. Now, we were talking earlier about Breakfast at Tiffany's, of course, where you're going back to the 60s, but this is going back to Rex Whistler in 1927, and I think it's because he depicts a slave figure in the mural because it's depicting the time of colonialism. And so that's a reality of that time, isn't it? So what?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily, I can't speak to the artwork because I haven't got in to examine it because there was someone sitting there eating
something
at the time.
It's very disruptive.
I actually quite like this idea of having artworks in conversation with each other. They can just have someone with a big mural just going, "This is evil," over here, just pointing arrows towards the other one. But that is a way of doing it. At least that's a dialogue, as opposed to sort of erasing it, or sort of blocking that room off like it never existed. Why not have another piece of art there, and then let's see how it all interacts, and at least we can be educated.
Well, it's not a new thing. You have that in the main square in Florence. You have sort of Cellini's Perseus and the replica of Michelangelo's David, which is seen as a conflict between Medici's and the Republic.
You lost me at Florence, but yeah.
Oh, fine, okay. But there is this. There's a history of that kind of thing.
And I love the idea that there is, conflict in front of you that is discussed and can be solved or not solved. I love it.
It's better than sort of taking a roller and sort of
whitewashing. Absolutely.
That which would be particularly bad, I think. Although not out of the question for some activists, I think. Anyway, the next question is from Robert. Where is Robert? Hi, Robert.
Moustache.
Robert with the fabulous
we
moustache.
love the moustache,
Thank you.
Robert.
Good evening. Should directors of diversity and inclusion be paid more than the British Prime Minister?
Well, there's a tone there, Robert, in what you say.
I think we know your answer. I think we can hazard a guess.
So this is Lorraine Martins, who's the Network Rail's Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Now, it was reported this week that she's actually paid up to £164,000 a year. Boris Johnson's salary is £162,000 a year. So
poor puppet.
I know, it's such a shame. So this idea that it is a big industry, the diversity and inclusion industry. There's a lot of money to be made within that. Is it necessary? Josh, what do you think?
I think that's a huge amount of money. I think that puts you in the top 1% of earners.
It does, yeah.
I think Robert was asking the question because I think he's also a diversity officer. He's got the look.
Yes, absolutely.
He looks just exactly what I think. Look, people could be paid for their jobs, but how much does that compare to what the owner of, or not the owner, but the people who actually run the rail company earn? And also, I believe there are some sort of likes or tweets, and these things always sort of come out, where she's sort of talked about white privilege, maybe, or liked some tweets about privilege. If you're earning the top 1%, I don't care what ethnicity you are. That is privilege.
You're quite privileged.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think as well, this whole argument about wages and the disparity between what footballers earn compared to, sort of newly qualified teachers, comedians. Well, some comedians make an absolute fortune out of this and others don't. But that, again, has to be looked at. The fact that we were talking about the fuel crisis and the fuel prices going up, but yet Shell are making huge profits. The whole disconnect between what the 1% earn versus the majority of the rest of us has to be looked at.
You make a good point here about money and about class, effectively, because when we talk about this whole diversity industry, class it never comes into it.
No.
So,
but it rules everything.
It's diversity of race, gender, sexuality, that kind of thing. But when it comes to opportunity, to privilege, as you put it, money is everything.
Absolutely.
And we don't get quotas. I mean, like, for instance, it's 7% of the country are educated privately, right? If people were to introduce quotas where they said, well, 7% of our workforce will be from private schools, the other 93 will be from state schools, that would be an interest that you probably resolve all your diversity issues in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
But they don't do that, do they? And often you get sort of minorities who are from very privileged, wealthy backgrounds promoted quickly, but people who are poor are sort of scuppered.
Well, the idea that there used to be a theatre company in Scotland, sadly bust now, called 784, and that was named that because 84% of the wealth was owned by 7% of the population.
Yes.
That is now screamingly, off the scale, 1%, 99%.
It's much different now, yeah.
And so the idea that we're not doing something about that and is about class and it is about, the idea, a lot of comedians actually do very well in this industry because they have money.
Yeah.
So, if you can't fund yourself, then, things are much more... and everything's more expensive if you're poor. I mean, I've been on benefits. I brought up 3 kids after I got divorced. And, I had to go into a fuel card system. And so then it's more expensive for that electricity because you pay more. So everything, the poorer you are, the more expensive everything becomes, including getting any kind of loan or any kind of access to society becomes more and more expensive. And it's happening more and more now. And what's happened over my sort of growing up through all this is that middle classes earn just enough to possess blinkers. So they don't see it.
Well, I think that's very well said, Jojo. And I think, and it's a very good point about comedy as well. I think a lot of the a lot of the comedians who get very far very quickly tend to be independently wealthy because they can spend the days writing. They don't have to be doing a job and then going out in the evening. And I wrote a play for 784.
Did you? They were a great theatre company.
They went bust just after, but it wasn't actually.
Was it you?
It wasn't me. Mine was not the last one.
And also, full disclosure, I did grow up in a castle, but we had.
You did grow up in a castle.
That's how I know what it looks like up there. But we started at the top and steadily worked our way down.
Yeah, that's not even.
My dad died £750,000 in debt. Who says you can't take it with you?
Not even a lie. Jojo was raised in a castle, but then the family became poor. It's an interesting story, but it's not all about you.
Yes, it
it's not
is.
all about you. We've got to carry on. We've got questions. Question from Christian. Where's Christian? Hi, Christian.
Hi, great show. Thanks for having me. Is chimp paradox a racist term?
The chimp paradox. Right, OK, now I only read about this the other day, and this is about someone who lost a race discrimination case against her former employees. This is Lindana Simbandi, and what had happened is she was asked about how she kept her inner chimp at bay. And the question is to do with this thing called the chimp paradox. This is a mind management tool invented by Professor Peters, and it differentiates between irrational emotional thoughts and rational ones. It's got nothing to do with chimps. And, of course, there's this association that people thought it was a racist slur, but it absolutely wasn't, sort of demonstrably wasn't a racist slur. So, I mean, I think if she would have thought that this person was being racist, I would get why that would be deeply upsetting. Yeah. And I think if the person was saying it from a racist place, that's not on and that he should be punished. But he wasn't. Why did it go this far?
Well, it's a larger story, and to be honest, I think it sounds like someone's being a little bit opportunistic here.
Right.
Because there were like questionnaires sent out beforehand saying, like, this is what we need to do, think about your inner chimp. Then there was the actual work. There was a workshop itself. So it's not like she didn't know that this is what. Now, she may say afterwards, oh, I didn't know that this is what they were talking about. Well, in that case, you weren't paying attention during the workshop, in which case you should use your job.
Now, I didn't know that from reading the coverage that I read. It was almost implied that they just came out with it. I wouldn't know what that phrase was.
No, so they sort of said, look, they would. No, I wouldn't have either, but they'd sort of like, they were doing workshops specifically about this stuff. And this only came out. She didn't complain at the time. Right. Later on, there was she had a complaint put against her by a junior person saying that she was, I can't use the word, so I don't want to get sued, but not that there was a word that would allow me to sue, but just the exact word.
Josh.
Anyway, the point is, there was a complaint against her, and she then took it up the ladder. Then she got into an argument with her boss.
Right.
And then at that point, she went, oh, by the way, this thing that happened, like, about the chimp thing. So that sounds a little bit dodged to me.
So this puts a whole different perspective on it for me. I mean, do you think that right? It sounds opportunistic, doesn't it?
It does sound opportunistic. And again, I sort of looked into it, and so I mean, it's a valid theory of emotional response and things. So
apparently it's quite established.
Yes, quite established. And it's funny that we don't know certain things. I discovered another thing when I was looking at that, something called the Mandela effect. Does anybody know what that is?
I don't know what that is.
The Mandela effect is when, as a society, a huge amount of people believe that something happened when it didn't actually happen. And one of the really good examples is that Walker's Crisp changed blue crisps from salt and vinegar from blue crisps into green packets.
Did that not happen?
And it didn't happen, apparently.
What? Oh, wow.
It didn't happen.
So, and this is...
it's a mass psychosis
And why is it called the Mandela effect?
The Mandela effect, that certain things had happened, people, because there's the Mandela effect.
Because Mandela bought out Walker's Crisp.
Yes, he did.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, fine.
No, let's start that new Mandela effect now.
Because there's a huge amount of people that believe that Mandela died in prison.
Oh,
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Wow, there we go.
Okay, so that's really. There are
Wait a
loads.
minute.
There are loads of
He
things
didn't
like that.
die in prison.
You see, we could go on about. I read one the other day. So I was gutted by this. So apparently, there's that story about Aeschylus that he died because an eagle dropped a tortoise onto his bald head, thinking it was a rock to break open. That's not true, apparently. I was gutted,
isn't it?
I thought that was
true. We've all got false memories.
We've all got
rewritten history. God, it's a minefield.
It is a minefield, Jojo. Anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be speaking to the man who has founded a new group that aims to push back against the new homophobia that is within gender identity ideology. See you in a couple of minutes. Yay.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News
Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, a new group that aims to push back against the new homophobia of gender identity ideology has been set up. So the Gay Men's Network has been founded by Dennis Kavanagh, who is the legal commentator for Lesbian and Gay News. And Dennis joins me now. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Now, I want to talk to you about this new group that you're setting up, but before we do that, let's just explain to people, because I don't think people will understand what you mean. When you say that there is a sort of growing, a burgeoning homophobia, which has largely come out of this new gender identity ideology, what do you mean by that?
Well, what we mean is this. At the core of gender identity ideology is a very simple proposition that's seductive and it looks attractive, but it's in fact very dangerous. And you can boil it down to this. What's happening, what's being taught in schools around the country is this. If you're a gender non-conforming boy, if you're camp, if you're artistic, if you're autistic, if you're not big and macho, then that's evidence, some will say, that you are in fact a female. And the contrary applies to butch girls.
Like tomboys and that kind of thing.
Exactly. This isn't just an academic thing, sadly. We know that at the premier gender clinic in the United Kingdom, the Tavistock, the safeguarding lead, Sonia Appleby, was so concerned about homophobia as a safeguarding issue. She ended up taking that clinic to a to a tribunal as a whistleblower. And there was clear evidence before the court that homophobia was fueling some children being placed into gender clinics. And we are alarmed by that, we're terrified by that, and for many gay people, we look at that and we say, well, goodness me, that could have been us, and we need to do something about it.
See, people will say that, well, they won't believe you when you say that, but I've seen evidence of this myself. I remember seeing that documentary, Transgender Kids, and where a man was interviewed, and he was talking about how, isn't it great that now I can see my daughter running, whereas I don't have to look at my little boy mincing about. That was basically what he said. And it's almost as though the homophobia can fuel that kind of... And actually, at the Tavistock Clinic, I believe there was a private joke amongst the people there that, oh, soon there won't be any gay people left.
Well, the Times article that reports this begins with, it's a great article, it begins with the line, there was a dark joke amongst staff that soon there will be no gay people. And you read
real,
that,
right?
Yeah, that's real. That's a quote from their staff. And you read that as a gay man. And you think, well, that's your dark joke? Ha ha.
Yeah.
This is terrifying, that this is something that staff think is funny.
So the nub of gender identity ideology, then, the idea, I think Helen Joyce describes it as you have a kind of sexed soul within you. And so often, and not in all cases, but there are some activists who do, as you say, interpret traditionally feminine boys as being a girl trapped in a boy's body, but isn't this kind of quite regressive in terms of the conservative stereotypes of gender that it draws upon?
It's precisely that. You cannot have gender identity, and as you say, Helen Joyce says this, without really regressive 1950s stereotypes about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And so it's only right that there is now pushback against this, because as you appreciate, this is an ideology that prima facie seems to have captured almost entirely the United Kingdom charity sector. They speak with one voice on this. They speak as in the style of unelected political parties, and they have the ear of government. And that's one of the reasons we've set up our organisation, which is similar to organisations like Sex Matters, which is an organisation that deals primarily just with biological sex characteristics, or lesbian fight back, or lesbian labour, because we want to say, look, this is regressive. And this is dangerous, and as was demonstrated in that case I mentioned, Appleby and Tavistock, this now amounts to a safeguarding issue for young gay people. Yeah. So as an older generation of gay men, with our organisation and working with other organisations, want to stand up to this and say, look, this isn't right, this isn't the right way to treat children, and this is being fuelled by homophobia.
So then what do you say to people who say, well, but look, some kids will end up having gender dysphoria, so trans people were children once.
Yeah, of course.
So you know, isn't this... People will accuse you, I'm sad to say, of transphobia and hate.
Yeah, and that's a very common accusation. But of course, what that misses out is that there are an enormous number of trans commentators who would agree with every single word I've just said. Trans people are not a monolith, in the same way that gay people are not a monolith. And plenty of decent trans people can see precisely what's going on here. You've had Debbie Hayton on here before, who I know would agree with every word of this. There are plenty of other trans commentators who take this view. So it's a lazy slur, right, just whenever you hear something you disagree with, to say that's hatred, that's a phobia. The point is, a court recognised that homophobia was a safeguarding risk.
Yes.
And we say, if that's the case, why on earth weren't the gay charities at the barricades saying, we have to do something about this? They weren't.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people, when we talk about Stonewall, for instance, they have a memory of Stonewall as being that group that campaigned for gay rights before we had equal age of consent, before we had equal marriage, before we had all of those things, right?
Yeah.
When Section 28 was there. So all of those great victories, Stonewall really were at the heart of that.
Absolutely.
But now on their website and in their promotional materials, they've changed the definition of homosexual to say that this doesn't mean same-sex attracted, this means same-gender attracted. And what they're meaning by that is that actually biology has nothing to do with same-sex attraction, whereas, of course, I would argue that at the core of the gay rights movement is an acknowledgement of biology.
Yeah, well, you would think so. And you know, I try to be temperate in my language, but no one ever asked us gay people if we were OK with this. This change took place unilaterally in the corridors of power amongst an aristocratic class of charity people who turned around one day and said, no, you're not homosexuals anymore, you are homogendered. And I might add this, if I may. That is not only wrong and makes no sense. I'm not attracted to gendered souls. No one is. People are attracted in part to physicality. That's a normal part of humanity. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. But I would add this point as well. It's also discordant with legislation. The Equality Act, our protected characteristic, is of same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
So insofar as any charity pretends that the protected characteristic is anything else, they are far beyond the law in this area, and they're far beyond the reality and the lived reality of gay men.
But continually, that is the case. I mean, and a lot of people have levelled that accusation at Stonewall, saying you are representing the law as you would like it to be, not how it actually is. And I've even seen on police websites, when they talk about hate crime, they talk about protected characteristics, and it's gender identity is there. But that's not there in the 2010 Equalities Act, is it?
No, it's not. The protected characteristic is gender reassignment. I think it's Section 7. And look, this is dangerous. I had 15 years as a criminal barrister, and I was assiduously regulated in everything that I did, in every pronouncement I made, and in the ethics I was held to, and in the legal advice I gave. And we have this bizarre situation in this country where we have a charity sector and associated industries hanging off that provide this legal advice.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned what we get as a result of that. One only needs to look at police forces. Police forces, for goodness sake, who should know the law, getting it fundamentally wrong. And that tells us that whatever regulation is going on in this sector is failing.
So then what do we do about that? Because Stonewall, as we know, as a group, has found its way into all sorts of positions of influence, with the ear of government, into the police, as you say, particularly into schools, I have to say, as well. With that degree of power, and with them sort of propagating this idea of gender identity ideology, and it is very much an ideology, how do we push back against that? Especially because a lot of people don't understand the issues. They think they're just talking about what we used to call transsexuals or people with gender dysphoria. That's not what it's about, is it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a big task. I think the answer to your question is that we have a duty, particularly when we're dealing with things like the safeguarding issue of homophobia that I've mentioned, we have a duty, particularly as older gay men, to challenge this. But we recognise, as is the premise of your question, that we're dealing with something that's incredibly powerful, incredibly influential, and is spending the goodwill that Stonewall has built up over years and years and years and years and years. But it does seem to me the more and more extreme these organisations get, the more and more they hemorrhage credibility. We have Stonewall this week, for example, because it's fallen out with our equalities regulator, the ECHR, going to the UN to try and get it delisted from A-grade status to B-grade status.
Yes.
Now,
can you explain to us what happened there, what this group is?
Yes, certainly. This is the Equality and Human Rights Commission of this country, and its job is to balance the protected characteristics, age, sex, race, you name it, sexual orientation, to try and provide advice that works for everyone in society, not just one group, not just one special interest, everyone. And it did that in respect of gender recognition in Scotland, and it did that in respect of the conversion therapy ban.
And what were they urging the Scottish Government in this?
Well, in the Scottish Government's case, they said, we think that you should pause for a moment because your redefinition of the word woman looks like it's going to cause a problem. And lo and behold, the Scottish Court of Appeal, I think just Friday, I think it was, said precisely that. They said the Scottish Government had tried to do exactly what the EHRC warned them about. But of course, rather than engage with that discussion, rather than say, maybe you've got a point, rather than say, let's sit down, let's just discuss this as adults, no. As you've averted.
But this goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that this assumption that anyone who wants a discussion about these very difficult issues, right, is either hateful or transphobic or something like this. I now don't know any gay people who think Stonewall supports them. Something has really fundamentally changed. And I think they're, in a sense, sort of dining out on their older reputation. People don't know what is going on here. Is that right?
I think you're absolutely right. And in a way, you're echoing what Sir Trevor Phillips said in The Guardian, where he said, look, where is the old Stonewall? Where's the Stonewall of Simon Fanshawe, of Angela Mason? The Stonewall that won equal marriage by sitting down and talking and being respectful and not construing any point of disagreement as hate, because we cannot have legislation that functions on the basis of an accusatory denouncement of anyone with whom you disagree.
It's an irony to me that so many of the people who take your stance are accused of being hateful and transphobic when there's no evidence for any of that. It's just an assumption that's made. But the hatred that I do see a lot of the time online is coming from people who very much propagate gender identity ideology against gay people. And I've seen a kind of resurgence of a very old-fashioned kind of anti-gay hatred that invokes AIDS and things and talks about how homosexuals ought to, harm themselves and hurt themselves, and really vehement, vitriolic. And there's pages and pages of this stuff, and people don't believe it, but it's all been recorded. Where is that coming from? Why this sort of... I mean, is there something, essentially, about this ideology that just not hates, but has a homophobic basis?
I think, yes, there is. And I think in the extreme core of it, this ideology is the perfect vehicle for your homophobia. I would add to that, to take Alison Bailey's name in vain, I think there is also racism at the heart of this as well. I also think, and Maya Forstater or anyone, if they would say this to you, there's misogyny at the heart of this as well.
In other words, not that every activist feels that way, but if you have those prejudices, this is a perfect excuse.
Absolutely. Right. I'm not saying for a moment that if you believe in a gender ideology, you are hateful. I mean, if I did that, I'd be doing exactly what I've accused Stonewall of. I don't take that view. But I agree with you. I've seen more appalling, as you say, AIDS-related, all sorts of, gay sex disgusts me type comments, which I haven't seen in donkey's years. I've seen more recently than I have in years and years and years. And do you know what? It doesn't affect me. I'm a middle-aged married man. I'm comfortable. I can scroll past this stuff on Twitter. What I worry about are young gay men reading this stuff, being told there are all sorts of horrible things, and then being told potentially that they're not real men.
Yes.
That's what I worry about. And this younger generation who have those pressures and have all the pressures of being part of the smartphone generation, all the body pressures that go with that, these are the people I worry about.
Yeah, because I mean, I would say, because you can find any rubbish on Twitter, people, but quite genuinely, the extent of this is quite incredible, and there are people who have captured screenshots of thousands and thousands of these kinds. It's a very real, exactly. It's a very real thing, and like you, I thought we'd left those prejudices back in the 90s. You know?
It's extraordinary, and every now and then when you lift the veil on this sort of thing, it is just appalling.
So remind us what your group is called and when you're setting up and what you're going to be doing.
It's called the Gay Men's Network. We're just in the process of formalising the organisation at the moment. We've already responded to a few government responses. We'll put that together on our website. We should have something up and running for people to look at if they're interested in about 7 to 14 days.
Fantastic. Dennis Kavanagh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
After the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be looking at some of the week's best social media videos in our social sensations. Don't go away.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. So the row over transgender athletes in sport rumbles on after the performance of swimmer Leah Thomas this week. Born William Thomas, who is ranked 462 in the male rankings, but transitioned and is now #1 in the female rankings. Thomas set a pool record in winning the 500-yard freestyle in the Ivy League Championships in Boston. So to discuss this issue, I am joined by John Pike, who is a senior lecturer in philosophy and the ethics and metaphysics of sport, and also GB News' very own Nana Akua. Welcome. Now, I'm going to come to you first, John, about this. So this has really set the internet alight. I think a lot of people are very upset about this because they see a kind of sense of injustice in that someone who transitions and can immediately win the... Not only that, but set new records. So what do you think about this?
I think it is an obvious injustice, and I think this, what we're seeing is bringing to fruition a process that's been going on over a number of years, with people taking their eye off the ball and not looking at the policies that, for example, the IOC has put through, the International Olympic Committee has put through. And this case brings out really the absurdity and the unfairness of the moves towards liberalising the possibilities for people like Thomas, people who are male-bodied athletes, to compete in women's sport.
Yes. And we've just seen the clip there of the race. It was won by quite a margin. Can I come to you, Nana? So, I mean, you see that, and that's a women's race, and Leah Thomas identifies as female. People would say, well, this is someone who has transitioned, so why shouldn't Leah Thomas be in the women's category in sport? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, she might identify as female, she might have gone through the gender reassignment, but it's not fair to put her in a category with women because women actually have a totally different physiology to men. So even if you change the way it looks on the outside and make it look as though you are a woman and you yourself personally feel that you are a woman, ultimately this category is a female category. And the reason why that is because of the advantage that if you went against men, there's no way the woman would win. And it's quite clear that the fact that Leah Thomas was not that great a swimmer when it was in the men's category, however, when she transitioned and went in the female category, she's now winning the race and beating records. And they say that even when they look at the way she won the race as well, she had such a reserve, they think she slightly held back so it didn't look too obvious that she was winning.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's not fair as well to the actual women. What about the women themselves? Why is no one considering how the women feel competing against this athlete?
So this is an interesting one, John, because when I talk to women about this who have a particular understandable sensitivity to, or a sense of injustice about this, and they will say, well, you know, this individual went through puberty as a male, and that confers all kinds of advantages. And would that be a fair argument?
Well, that's all true. That's all true. So the argument that you need to present is that, that people advocating for Thomas's right to swim is that those male advantages don't matter from the point of view of fairness. Now, there's an argument there, but it's an argument for unisex sport. It's an argument for the abolition of women's sport. Yes. You could say, look, let's just everyone compete in the same competition. No women's sport. Men will win all the time, almost all the time, because of their biological advantages. What you've got here, so that's a sort of 19th century chauvinist, male chauvinist argument that women have defeated. But it's kind of coherent in a way. What you've got here is actually a worse argument than that 19th century chauvinism. What you've got here is that with kind of added postmodern salt and pepper, added seasoning, to say that, well, male advantage does matter, so we should have a female category, but then male advantage doesn't matter for trans people to compete in that female category.
But then what would you say to people who counter that and say, but, you know, there are women who are very weak and women who are very strong, and there's all kinds of differentiation within sex categories?
Yes, and that's why we have sport. And what we do is see what people's capacities are and how much they've trained. But women as a group, as a sex, cannot access male advantage because you can't change sex. I mean, we know that people can't change sex. It's a myth to suggest, and an anti-scientific myth to suggest that you can actually change sex. Of course, people can present in different ways, and that's not problematic in most circumstances. But there are circumstances in which bodies matter, and sexed bodies matter, and sport is the most obvious one. The trouble is, if you push a line that says only gender identity matters and not sexed bodies, you are left in a ridiculous position with respect to sport and women's sport. But it's a phenomenon that carries over into other aspects of the social world, like prisons, like changing areas, like rape crisis centres and so on. But once you give up on the idea that you can trump sex with gender identity, everything else comes into play. So this is why the sport issue is really critical, because it's so obvious there that sex matters.
So can I come to you on that, Nana? So, I mean, this idea that gender matters far more than biological sex is now sort of so widely accepted, isn't it? That just seems to be the norm now in major institutions, in sporting institutions. How does that make you feel about?
Well, I think it's totally unacceptable, and it's not true, is it? I mean, it's a delusion that you can... I mean, even if you change everything the way it looks, the physiology stays the same. So you are still physiologically male, even though you've changed and transitioned and you identify as a woman. So all the advantages that come with being male will still exist when you are a woman.
And what do you say to the... So the counter-argument, people would say, well, look, someone like Laurel Hubbard, someone like Leah Thomas, you know, this is someone who has gone through this procedure, which was probably not an easy thing to do. They've changed their identity, the way that they feel about themselves. And, of course, part of these individuals' passion is sport. And should they have to then give up their passion? That seems unfair, doesn't it?
Well, they may think it's unfair, but it's not fair to the women who are actually ultimately the ones who are going to lose out on this line of if we carry on, because it's always the women that lose out, isn't it? It'll always be that way. And the problem with these situations is exactly the fact that it will extend into wider issues in life, where these people who are now categorised as women will be able to take advantage of those situations as well, whether they've been through some horrible process or not. I would say that there could be a transgender game. There needs to be a different category, but there aren't enough transgender athletes, by the looks of things, to do that.
That's an interesting one. We don't need that. What we need is a protected women's category that is for biological women, and then an open category, including men, just a category for anyone and everyone who wants to compete in. Now, of course, biological men will tend to win in that category, but I don't want to stop Leah Thomas swimming. Leah Thomas should swim in an open category. We certainly don't need a third category. And the reason we don't need a third category is that gender identity doesn't matter in sport. What you need is, so just as my politics or my sexuality or anything like that doesn't count when I'm being selected for a team, this is just something that's not relevant to competition between bodies. Bodies matter, and competition between sexed bodies matter. Men have an advantage in that, so you need a female category and an open category for anyone.
But what are the odds that that's going to happen? I mean, sorry.
That's not going to happen. I think this is all skewed towards men. It's almost like a form of misogyny in a way. The women have not been consulted about this, and the women would say that this is totally unfair. If you want to compete in sport, nobody's stopping you from competing in sport, but I just do think that as more people are changing gender and transgender becomes becomes more commonplace, there should be some transgender games. They can compete against people who have similar advantages to them.
But yet, so often this kind of argument is framed as being a transphobic argument, that you're against these people.
Well, that's the way they silence you, isn't it? Because ultimately, as the way I see it is a form of misogyny, because it is the men who are pushing forward and insisting that they must be in the spaces that are actually female. And I accept that somebody says, OK, I feel like I need to be a woman, and you've changed your gender in that respect. You haven't changed it physiologically, so you cannot expect to be competing on an equal level to women, because you are ultimately not a woman.
Is sport going to be the thing that changes this debate? Because I think there's so much possibility with collision sports, for instance, where someone could be seriously hurt.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is to do with safeguarding.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it going to be the sport issue that changes people's minds?
I think it may be, partly because the unfairness is so obvious in these cases, and these shots of Thomas swimming will be shown again and again on YouTube. And no one can really watch that and say, well, that's fair enough. That's straightforward.
Some people do.
Yeah, but only the transgender population, potentially. But do you know what? I think a lot of transgender people are looking at that and thinking that's not fair either.
Absolutely.
So it's not fair to tarnish them all with the same sort of perception that that's how it should be.
The most vehement defence I've seen has actually been from trans allies, people who are not themselves trans.
Exactly.
And they look at this and they say, well, what's wrong with that? But I think when we saw the footage earlier, it does strike everyone, I think, as unfair. Yeah. And potentially, if something were to happen, some horrible injury, would that, is that what we're going to have to wait for?
Well, I hope not. And I think that sporting bodies need to attend to their responsibilities here for safe and fair sport, for women.
Yes.
Now, Leah Thomas's identity and I might say ego, although it's the rules that are the problem, not Leah Thomas, cannot be allowed to trump safe and fair sport for women. I'd happily swim in a competition against Leah Thomas in an open category. It's for men to budge up, if you like, and make way for people who are not conforming to stereotypes, who identify in a different way, but who have the biological advantages that I have to swim in a fair competition against me. And Thomas would beat me, but that's not a problem.
We could talk about this for a long time, but unfortunately that is our time. Thanks very much to John and Nana. Thank you. Now, every week, we dedicate this part of the show to the turbid waters of social media, and we're going to start with this video from Pennsylvania, which shows high school students throwing away dozens of books written by white authors. They are, apparently, supposedly, decolonising the the school library. Let's have a look at this. So here you can see this is being created on a smartphone or something like that. They're picking out the books from the library, tossing them, oh, that's Christina Hoffsummer's book there, I've read that one, tossing those books into the basket. And it gets worse, by the way. Now, you'll notice some of the names in there. There is a debate about what decolonising the curriculum actually means. These people are taking it very, very far, and they're finding... And now you can see they're throwing the books into the dumpster outside of the school. Very proud. You'll notice all the people who are doing this are white, by the way, white students. Yes. Who are look at it's a bad shot. Bad shot.
Women's sport.
Look how proud they are. Look how proud they are. We could have played the full video, but the music has some offensive language which we can't play pre-Watershed. But there we go. So when you see that, Josh? Are you proud of progressivism?
It makes me sick. That makes me sick. Honestly, first, we can't play it because they're using hip hop, so they're appropriating. They're being hypocrites as well.
They are completely appropriating. I hadn't thought of that.
They are like Hitler Youth book burners, as far as I'm concerned. Goodness. And I raise my kids. Books are a big part of our life, our family. I treat them from day one. You respect books. To see books being thrown away. It makes me feel sick.
There is something. I mean, people might say, "Well, they're just books, right?" They don't. But there is something visceral about the sight of a burning book. I remember those protests against Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses, and people on the streets of Bradford.
And there's something against him.
Well, I mean, there's that as well.
And still the fact was.
Your father was an author, so I mean, you know,
an author of 45 books. He was threatened with being kneecapped, wanted to...
Really?
One page out of a book because he exposed the tax evader Khashoggi, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was an email swindler.
So for
email
you,
swindler was a tax evader, yeah.
When you see people... I mean, this is a clear attack on the creation of literature, the creation of... how does it feel?
Honestly, it feels like I'm being Darren Browned, or is suddenly GB News turned into a hidden camera show?
Yeah, it does seem mad.
This is insanity. It's the level of insanity I can't cope with.
Let's just quickly move on, because there's this old question. Do you think there is a time when robots will rule the world? Well, this clip has been going around from Boston Dynamics. This is a company that says its mission is to imagine and create exceptional robots that will enrich people's lives. Just take a look at this, though.
Pretty cool.
I find it utterly terrifying, and I'm going to come to you, Josh. What do you think about that?
I think that they should. They should compete in women's sport.
Don't think we're going to top that, so let's bring the show to an end. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for Free Speech Nation. So this was the week when Nick Clegg got a nice new job, Justin Trudeau got tough with the truckers, and students in America started burning books in the name of progress. Very sinister stuff. But thank you very much to my panel, Josh Howie and Jojo Sutherland, and of course to my lovely guests, Francis Gilbert, Fraser Myers, Dennis Kavanagh, John Pike and Nana Acquia. And if you want to hear more from Nina Power, who is in my podcast, you can do that. It's dead easy. Just go to Free Speech Nation, the podcast. Now, that full hour-long interview is live right now. You can watch that on YouTube, or you can access it wherever you download your podcast normally, on Spotify and all those audio streaming services. And if you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our wonderful audience, you can. All you need to do is go to www.sroaudiences.com. That's right there below on the screen right now, www.sroaudiences.com. Now, hopefully the storms will be gone by this time next week, so why not come along and join us? You can apply there. We have food, we have drink, all sorts of stuff. The wine isn't great, but, we have a good time. Stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight. That's coming up right next. And don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 p.m. That's the late-night paper preview show, where comedians such as Josh and Jojo will talk you through the next day's top news stories. Thanks so much for watching Free Speech Nation. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking very windy for many as Storm Franklin moves across the UK. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and it will be a very blustery start with a scattering of showers around. In between the showers, though, some sunshine will begin to develop. Across into the southeast, and winds may still reach gale force at times throughout the morning, with some rain moving across the area. Some rain and hill snow will affect parts of Wales during the morning, with severe gales possible along the north coast. Severe gales will also develop across parts of the northwest, making the rush hour difficult in places. The strong winds will be accompanied by some further rain in places. The rain will be beginning to ease across the northeast during the morning, but although winds won't be as strong here, it will still be very blustery to start the new working week. A chilly start for Scotland, with showers focused across the north and west, with the best of the drier weather across Dumfries and the Lothians. After a very windy night for Northern Ireland, the winds should start to ease during the morning, with showers also beginning to move away to the east. Storm Franklin will begin to move away as we head towards lunchtime, allowing winds to slowly ease with some drier weather developing. And that's how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
On Mark Dolan tonight, with Canada arresting protesters in the capital, is the very principle of freedom in the West under threat? We'll speak to the leader of Reform UK, Lawrence Fox, and former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. What are the true origins of COVID? We'll catch up with Matt Ridley, who's written a best-selling book exposing the origins of the virus. My all-star panel include the Sun columnist Tony Parsons. And in my big opinion monologue, Boris Johnson is right to scrap all COVID restrictions. See you at 9.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the